Bob Seeley is with us, former Conservative MP. Afternoon to you, Bob. I mean, you remember the heady days of Boris's enthusiasm, the sunny uplands. I mean, he was incredible at that. It was his greatest skill, arguably.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Ian. By the way, good afternoon, to you and listeners. Look, I like Boris on a personal level because his optimism was infectious. He was a happy person and he enjoyed life, and actually people warmed to him. The problem that we have now is that effectively he led a Conservative party and his policies were not very conservative when it comes to extreme net zero that we are now undoing, rightly so. A too laxed approach to immigration, which is just completely wrong, and we are, living with the consequences. So on a personal level, I like Boris, but the problem is I say to a lot of Conservatives who like Boris, did you like his policies? And they say, well, no, we didn't. And the problem is that people ultimately vote for policies, and our policies were wrong. We spent 2 years trying to reverse that before the last election, but because of the Ukraine war, because of COVID, we couldn't turn things around fast enough. I wish Boris had been a bit more conservative, and I think things would have been different for him and for everyone else.
It's interesting, isn't it? I remember saying to friends and people I know sort of on the left who were sort of describing Boris Johnson as this sort of rabid, extreme right-winger, as the left often do, because anyone who's slightly to the right of their left is seen as some sort of bonkers extremist. And I was saying, if you'd have, prior to Boris Johnson being Prime Minister, if you were to say, name a right-wing Conservative MP, you'd have had to have gone through a lot of names before you got to Boris Johnson.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was slightly as I say, the thing about Boris, he was very infectious and he was a great guy on a personal level. He was very engaged. He's really intellectual. He loved his arguments and his classical allusions. So he had a lot of good personal qualities, some not so good personal qualities. Let's just put that out there as well. He had a lot of very good personal qualities. But I mean, the policies that we adopted at the time, I think, came back to haunt us massively. Yeah. And the first one, and I felt it at the time going wrong, was HS2. And this is not because we don't need infrastructure. We really badly need infrastructure projects in this country, but there is a difference between good infrastructure projects and bad. And actually, the way that Boris would have signalled his absolute commitment to levelling up, to getting, to engaging with the North, and there's some of those left behind towns, would be to be a massive rebuilding of Northern Rail. And how did we help levelling up? By driving a railway through Buckinghamshire. How on earth that helps levelling up, I do not know.
Yeah, indeed. Fair point. We're talking about Donald Trump here as well, Bob. The kind of interesting parallels, I suppose. There is some synergy between Trump and Boris in that respect of enthusiasm.
Mr. Not Trump's, in policy.
But not absolutely not in policy. But that sense that, that Trump has with the American people and beyond, they like him for a number of reasons, but it is often how he says something. I mean, he is showing some words in action now with what he did with Colombia at the weekend, which was, I was tempted to say it's a stroke of genius. It wasn't a stroke of genius, it was just a stroke of common sense, wasn't it? That's what he stands for. Like, here's some bad people. They're going back to the very country they came from. Colombians go, no, you can't do that. He goes, yes, we can. Otherwise, there's a big old tariff coming your way. OK, yes, you can then. I mean, very simple. I think he was on the golf course when he made that decision.
We give Pakistan £450 million a year in aid. There's a lot of visas going to Pakistan, and I think we need to start sending back illegal immigrants, criminals back to where they came from with lifetime bans. And if people don't like it, there are tools and measures that we can use, like stopping aid, stopping visas. We should do the same thing. And sometimes genius is just doing basic things that actually somebody has to step up and do them. And I'm really hoping that Kemi, new Conservative Party under new ownership, this is the sort of stuff that Kemi's absolutely got to grab. We have got to do things differently, because we all agree, sadly, all the polling shows that people don't think things are going to get better in this country. Don, sadly, who you quoted a few minutes ago, was absolutely spot on. It's our political temperature is frankly as grey as the miserable weather we're having at the moment, and there's an answer to this. And if Kemi gets her chance, and if we get a chance again, we've got to come in and just be dealing with this. First week, get rid of these these human rights acts that mean judges can overrule political decisions that we can't govern. You know, I was reading another crazy case of human rights where you've got some Jamaican rapists who can't be deported because of some sort of manipulation and twisting of some human rights agenda or some family rights that he claims to have. I mean, we are living in crazy times, and actually, if we did what Trump did, we'd be much better off for it. I'm not a huge fan of Trump, and I think he does some things terribly. But I mean, my God, that's, you know, clear leadership. And for me, the interesting thing is when he comes to this country, all his diplomats are going to be saying, please bite your tongue. Please don't say anything about Labour. Don't kick off about the left. And it's just going to be interesting to see how on message Starmer is going to be, or if he finds it impossible to stay on message and he starts giving Labour and indeed the British people the benefit of his opinions. And, you know, if you look at all this polling, the stuff that he does and the stuff that he's doing, whether you like Trump or not, people appreciate those policies.
Absolutely right. And again, when it comes to, you know, how Trump is able to impart that stuff compared to a lot of what we have, you know, in this country, I always sense, Bob, there's a sort of a groupthink type Western leader out there. You know, we've had it with leaders, with the sort of Trudeau, Macron kind of skin that is worn. And when it comes to immigration in particular, politicians left and right just don't want to break the kind of, you know, conventional, neat, tidy, agreed line.
I completely agree. This started basically with New Labour back in '97, and I can tell you, I mean, as we know at the time, if you raise this as an issue, you're basically smeared with the racism brush, and that has ceased to work. But it has taken the best part of 20 years to turn that around. And, you know, if you look at the sort of stuff that Trump is doing, illegal immigration and deportations, 60% of British people agree with that. If you're looking at trade protectionism, maybe not such a good idea. I'm not sure I believe in it, but you've got overwhelming support for that. Probably the most important, along with immigration, merit-based, colourblind society, overwhelming support. You know, two-gender policy, overwhelming support. Even an end to net zero, not moderating, but an end to net zero, there is nearly 50% support for that policy when asked. But this is people in Britain, not people in the US. So there is a, you know, whoever taps into that is going to do extremely well in the next election.
Let's look at the current government then, particularly the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, being accused of trying to bring Britain back into the EU through this European customs deal. We know that, you know, in the DNA of most of the Labour front bench, in fact, I think probably all of them, there is a, you know, an ideal world they would rejoin. Starmer has said no to a customs union, no to rejoining. But it does appear that he's meddling with quite a lot of agreements along the line. This is about the fifth or sixth thing I've read since last July that sort of suggests they are, look, if they want to get a greater trade deal, fantastic, or whatever it is. But do you sense that there is a desire from our leaders, Bob, or our current leaders, to sneak us back into Brussels, as it were?
Yeah, look, Ian, they would dearly like to if they could. There's no question about that. I mean, I think one can overreact to things. And, you know, I'm a Brexiteer, but having you know, having better trade relationship with the European Union, I'm not against that at all. And I think one of the problems is that we haven't made as much use of the freedoms that we've got from Brexit. And even Starmer now sees this. You know, Starmer was saying we can do more with AI. Now we're outside the European Union. And I think I think the Labour Party is going in lots of different directions at once at the moment. But clearly, after a truly awful 6 months in government where they've effectively imploded whilst in office, they are now beginning the slow realisation as reality hits their agenda. We've seen that because we're going to have this big announcement about a third runway. You know, so all the time in opposition, they were against it. Starmer voted against it. Now he's in favour. Rachel Reeves at Davos, I've got the quote in front of me. My instincts is to have lower taxes, less regulation, make it easier for business to do business. Hallelujah. You know, better late than never. She's done so much damage to the economy that even she now realises that she cannot continue with these economically suicidal policies that Labour have put in. So effectively, they're distancing themselves from their first catastrophic 6 months. Do I think it's going to wash with the British people? No, because I think we've seen what Labour is, red in tooth and claw.
Yeah.
But I think what they're now going to try to do is reverse some of the more damaging aspects of some of the things that they were trying to do. I don't think they're going to succeed, but frankly, anything that stops the hemorrhaging of business confidence and us going into a recession is good. And, you know, as regards Heathrow, again, I mean, I've been called a NIMBY so often in my life. Big infrastructure projects are so important for the country. What we don't need is endless greenfield low density housing estates when we've got so much space in our inner cities and such low density in our inner cities. But we should absolutely be building more runway space in the southeast. That's true. I'd personally like to see the Boris Airport somewhere in the in the Thames estuary, 4 or 5 runways. Then you could turn Heathrow, shut down Heathrow and turn it into a new town, and you actually don't need to then keep building on greenfield sites all over the southeast, because you can build a new green town outside London called Heathrow.
Indeed. And what's interesting about this, and I mean, you really couldn't make this up, Bob. And if you suggested it for a plot in the thick of it, you know, you'd be Iannucci would laugh you out the room and say, no, this would never happen. But the clash with the net zero ideology of, so taking it from Labour's own perspective, we are net zero, you're all got to have a windmill on the top of your car and your house, solar panels on your kids' backpacks and God knows what else, and you know, anything other than that will not do. We're against petrol cars, we're against a fire that has a bit of wood on it because that's bad as well, but we're going to give the go ahead now because it looks as if Keir Starmer has reportedly dropped his opposition to the third runway. And of course, surely in any other world, Ed Miliband would go, I resign, cannot be part of a government. But of course he won't, because they'll say, don't worry, we're going to plant some trees in Cleethorpes and that's going to offset it somehow so everybody's happy. I mean, this is a nonsense.
It is a complete nonsense, and it's not only Miliband, but he is the zealot in chief. He is the Archbishop of Canterbury of this net zero. Yes. This incredibly damaging net zero religion, which is not going to save the world, but is actually going to impoverish people in this country and frankly deindustrialize us at a really alarming rate. You know, we do need to look after the environment. Nobody's disputing that. We do need to be clean, and nobody's disputing that. For me, the real damage of net zero is it actually pollutes the world even more, because all we're doing, we're exporting our industry, our heavy industry, our steel making, to China, that is building 2 coal-fired power stations. Coal is the single biggest contributor to global warming. They're building 2 coal-fired power stations every week to manufacture the stuff that we no longer make, to sell it back to us. So they're using very often slave labor. They're using appalling environmental technology, i.e. coal-fired power stations from, you know, centuries ago, decades ago, that we've practically stopped using, in order to enrich themselves by selling us back the things that we no longer make in this country. If we actually had a coherent energy strategy, we would be onshoring our heavy industry, and okay, our emissions would go up a bit, but not half as much as they would if this stuff was being produced in China. So it's not only the zealotry and this sort of sub-Marxism of Ed Miliband, which is so appalling, but actually the fact that he's destroying communities and ruining lives and ruining our economic growth for something which is actually counterproductive for the world. It is the opposite of good politics, and the fact that he's now just a hypocrite is literally the little glacier cherry on the top of this absolute pile of hypocrisy.
Absolutely right. The Archbishop of Bollards, I think we can possibly say.
Very nearly,
just about get away with that, can't we? Listen, Bob, great to have you on with us. We will speak again soon. Bob Seeley, former Tory MP, big common sense voice from the world of politics. Thank you.